We'll start off with the palm of the hand. Try to keep the cubic shape while smoothing the objects. We can then draw the tendons on the back of the hand that connect the fingers to the wrists. The part of the palm towards the thumb can be smoothed a bit more. To see the hands better, you can hide the rest of the body for now. To sculpt the palm, we can add a crease in the middle and add a bit of volume opposing the thumb. Also add a bit more volume where the fingers meet the palm. The thumb can also be put more into shape by having a rounded transition towards the palm and a straight one towards the wrist. On the other side, the wrist can relatively smoothly blend into the palm with a bit of a round profile on the side of the palm. The knuckles can be pronounced by pushing in the areas between them. Let's define the fingers more and pull them into the palm to properly connect them. It also makes sense to change the resolution of the voxel remesher to half the size to get even more geometry to sculpt on. As a tip, you can select multiple objects, enter sculpt mode on one of them, hold Alt while clicking on the voxel size value, and after accepting the changes, it will have changed the value for all the selected objects. To get the profile of the fingers right, it's great to know that fingers are not just cylindrical. The top part is relatively flat with a bit of a push in on the two sides. And the bottom half is way more round, except on the fingertips. We'll repeat this for all of the joints. If you haven't done it by now, you can also add the remesher to the quick favorites to make it more accessible at any time. You can also make the finger joints profile a bit less rounded on the sides. You can then push in the area between the joints a bit while pushing up the knuckles slightly. If you look at your fingertips, you will notice that the profile from the front is not the same. It's more triangular than square. That's why we can scrape off the sides a bit from the bottom, and on the top of the finger, we'll carve in a shape for the fingernails to rest in. We'll also scrape off a bit from the front to give it this tip on the bottom side. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to add the fingernail as a separate object. Place the 3D cursor on the fingertip and add a cylinder with Shift A. Then we'll scale it down and rotate it into place from the front view. Select and delete the faces on the top and bottom of the cylinder and select everything and press E to extrude. We're going to add a bit of thickness to the nails. Right-click to cancel moving the extrusion and then press Alt-S to scale the extruded faces along their normals. If the normals are inverted, use Shift-N while having everything selected to recalculate them. While using X-ray shading to see through the geometry, we will select the bottom half of the tube cylinder and delete it. Then select the open areas and fill them with F. Alternatively, you can also just select one of the edges of the open areas and press F, and it will automatically fill it. In sculpt mode, enable symmetry and push the front of the nail with the grab or snake hook brushes to give the nail the right rounded profile. Move it a bit more into place and even scale it down along one axis to make it more flat. Add more volume to the back half of the last finger joint so that only about half is covered by the nail. To not repeat this process for all the fingers, we'll just duplicate the objects we just sculpted. Select the index finger and duplicate it with Alt-D instead of Shift-D. This way, the object data is going to be shared between these objects, so that when we sculpt on one of the fingers, all fingers are sculpted at the same time. Just like with the primitives, scale the duplicated fingers and position them a bit. Afterwards, select the original objects and delete them. Now push back the first joint a bit more to connect them better to the palm. You can see how the changes are carried over to the other objects now. Also, as a tip, make sure there's some distance between the fingers where they connect to the palm. If you look at your own hand and spread out your fingers, you can see that there's quite some space between them. Even when having your fingers straight, there might still be a bit of space between them. To further sculpt the fingers, we can use the grab or snake hook brush and enable 2D fall off in the brush options. This option will apply the brush infinitely deep instead of the usual spherical radius that it has. Now we want the connections of the joints to be a bit angled towards each other. I can also draw some lines to show what I mean. These angles are important for the finger rotation. As an example, just make a fist with your own hand and look at your index finger or pinky finger from the side of the fist. You'll see that all joint connections are pointing into the middle like a cross. The thumb area of the palm of the hand can also be a bit more bulging in my case. If we look at the palm from the side, we can also see that it becomes a bit thinner from the wrist to the fingers. Now the only thing missing for the hand is the thumb. We can adjust the lower part a bit to get this two-corner profile. But keep in mind that the thumb has a different rotation than the other fingers. We can rotate the tip 45 degrees to get a more comfortable angle and adjust the lower part of the thumb to that. Also remember to take advantage of the symmetry options. The thumb has a similar profile as the other fingers. The end of the thumb is a bit at an angle from the side when the thumb is straight. We can also reuse the fingernail for the thumb by duplicating the object. Now we can quickly cover the foot, which I'm going to leave a bit more simple since this part of the body is rarely in the foreground and often covered with other clothes like shoes or socks. Start the typical remeshing and smoothing like always. We can then also continue the same profile of the Achilles by adding and subtracting on towards the heel. Now I can finally get into the third reason why the new voxel remesher is so useful. At this point, we need to merge these two objects of the foot into one. And in the first chapter, I showed you how to do this with the Boolean modifiers. This is still a valid method, but it's slow, and there's a way better way now. What we can do is we can join these two objects of the foot into one by selecting them and pressing Ctrl J. Afterwards, we'll just use the remesh and voila! It cleared all the intersections for us. This is saving us an incredible amount of time with the cost of losing the sharp edges we would get with a Boolean modifier. But since we're just going to sculpt over them anyway, this is not a loss right now. We can smooth the transitions a bit and round off the heel more. We can then use the clay strips brush to add the toes. They also have a bit of an angle to them, like the fingers of the hand, so push them a bit to the side with a grab or snake hook brush. We can also pronounce the shapes of the foot a bit more and scrape and smooth the side. Personally, I'll just simply carve in the toes from above and below, but you can use the same approach as with the fingers if you want some extra detail. The bottom side of the foot can be similarly treated like the palm of the hand, with more volume where the toes connect and the heel, and a little bit less volume in between. Mine look a little bit like a fin or a diver's flipper, so I'll grab the top surfaces a bit up to gain more volume. The toes also have a bit of a profile like the tip of the thumb. Add a peak to them with a draw brush to get the right angle of the toe joints. And this is it for the planar sculpt of the body. I'll see you in the next one, when we'll start to get into the merging, smoothing, and stylizing of the body.